Hey everyone, back with some more content from the content mines here on a sweltering East Coast. I hope you all are having a good weekend and staying cool and staying safe. Definitely, this heat wave is a concerning indicator or harbinger of climate changes to come. Got a lot of adaptation to do going forward, but I wanted to talk for a little bit fittingly, I think, given the heat and humidity. One of the hottest and most humid places that I've visited on my travels is Taiwan. It also happens to be one of the most beautiful countries on earth and full of some of the most friendly and welcoming people I've had the pleasure of meeting. And I've been to a few places now, and really enjoyed the summer that I spent there. Also hope they're all staying safe with the typhoon coming through. When I was there, I was living in Seattle at the time, and I lived through a small typhoon when I was living in Tainan, and was not used to thunder and lightning, having being a Seattle resident, so it freaked me out pretty bad. But they are certainly resilient to those things there. But as you saw in the title, I wanted to talk a bit about the $345 million military aid package that's been approved for Taiwan this week. And I saw a lot of coverage of this, noting that it was historic and sort of a landmark agreement, and then not a lot of elaboration on why that was the case. So I thought it might be helpful to talk for a minute about that and sort of discuss for a minute why I see it as a fairly historic agreement, and importantly, I think that the historicness, the landmarkness of this aid package, this military aid package, doesn't really have to do with the amount of money we're talking about, and I don't think it really has to do with the content of the package, although that is an interesting discussion maybe for another time. It looks like it's quite heavy on drone technology, which is interesting given recent events in Ukraine, especially. But the real reason I think that this package is important is it's being conducted under something called the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which is the product of some agreements in the early 1960s between Congress and the executive branch to basically give the executive branch a way of responding to international crises, to allies in a crisis, to be able to draw down essentially from pre-allocated funding that Congress has already set aside, sort of a maximum level per country kind of thing. And this is it's important. It's also like extremely bureaucratic and boring sounding. So you have this drawdown authority sort of as a contrast to what was previously done, which is really more under the Foreign Military Sales Program, and that's kind of more like you would see somebody agree to sell this many howitzers to Taiwan or this many drones or something, and we'll get that done in this amount of time in the future. The drawdown authority relies on already established stocks of munitions and weapons systems. So this is key. Obviously, I think the reasons that this is historic are kind of threefold. One is that it's just a fast way to do this, right? And that's important, I think, just in and of itself. The government of the United States demonstrating its commitment to rapidly supplying Taiwan in particular with weapons systems has some interesting ramifications, obviously, given the tensions over that country's continued independence. I think the second reason that this is somewhat historic is similar to the war in Ukraine and our support of Ukraine's military. This continues to be sort of the support for Taiwan, military support for Taiwan continues to be sort of a unique touch point of bipartisanship in the U.S. Congress, which is sort of, I feel like we say this every year and every new Congress, but this is, I think, easily the most divided Congress. Certainly in my lifetime, some of the internal cleavages between the political parties are at their most extreme in my memory, and I've lived through some fairly partisan periods of congressional history. So there's, I think, another sort of historic value here, or sort of trend that this is setting, which is really, Congress came together for the 2023 budget and in a bipartisan way said, okay, the drawdown authority for Taiwan is going to go up to $1 billion, which I think, even a few years ago, maybe it was last year, it was something in the $750 million range. So the other reason that this is historic is it really shows a cohesion and a unity despite the polemic and partisan trends that are sort of ripping Congress apart right now. It shows a continued bipartisan commitment to Taiwan, which I think has enormous signaling value, and really that's kind of my third reason that this is important is separate and apart or distinct from the speed at which this was, this sort of allows us to supply Taiwan with weapons, and separate from the sort of bipartisan signaling that this does. There's also, I think, an inherent signal here too that because of the recent utilization of the presidential drawdown authority and how that has been used so extensively to supply Ukraine with weapons and weapon systems, this is a signal again to the Chinese Communist Party, to the People's Republic of China, that really in this context, there's been a lot of ink spilled and a lot of hot air generated over, is China, how closely is China watching Ukraine? How much does this conflict sort of presage the next conflict? How much is Ukraine an indicator of what we might see in a Taiwan conflict in the future? All those arguments aside, I think what this drawdown authority utilization demonstrates is, as far as the executive branch and the Congress of the United States government is concerned, Taiwan does equal Ukraine, right? That we are going to use the same strategies that have, to be frank, worked quite well to support Ukraine and deliver weapons and weapon systems to Ukraine. Obviously, that process can be critiqued as well, but I think Ukraine has done better than, in the short to medium term time scale. It really has done better in this conflict than anybody imagined that they would be able to. And part of the reason that they've been able to do that is the United States leading really a quite cohesive international coalition of allies and using things like the Presidential Drawdown Authority to supply weapon systems in a granular way, in a responsive way, in a rapid way. And that really is, one of your questions, I think, if you're the Chinese Communist Party, if you're the Politburo Standing Committee, is are we going to be able to pull off a conflict in an invasion of Taiwan in a rapid way? They have a similar kind of calculus in a lot of ways to Russia and Ukraine, and frankly to the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. In these kinds of conflicts, speed and rapidity of sort of decapitating the government of the country that you're invading is really important. And if you're not able to do that, you start to look at a more intractable, prolonged conflict like we're seeing in Ukraine, and that's really where a responsive, tailor-made, granular, quick to update kind of, and really alliance-based support plan like what we've seen in Ukraine starts to create huge problems for the invading country. So at that point, I think there's this other sort of, I think, historical value to using the Presidential Drawdown Authority in the context of Taiwan, and that's just to say, as far as the U.S. government and the military-industrial complex is concerned, this is basically a very similar conflict, and we're going to respond to it in a similar way, and that has worked quite well thus far in Ukraine. So that provides, I think, a powerful signaling tool to anyone who would want to invade Taiwan as well. So to sort of sum it up, I think that's really how I see this. The Drawdown Authority has value historically because it's fast, it's responsive, it's coming from a bipartisan place, which is in and of itself a sign of sort of functionality in the U.S. government that many people have questioned whether that exists or not. And then obviously there's this sort of more normative, or I guess you could say historically, recent historical kind of messaging here as well, that in the context of the war in Ukraine, this also sends a very particular signal to the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China that this would look a lot like that, right? Our policies towards supporting this ally and sort of bringing other allies to bear would have this additional facet to it, which is this quite effective, responsive, and granular way of supplying arms and armaments. So anyway, I hope that's been somewhat helpful, and as always, really looking forward to your comments about my thoughts in the comments section below. They generally give me a lot to think about and are the most interesting part of making these videos to me. So anyway, have a great weekend, and thanks as always for tuning in.